Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to Wild Werewolf. Are you ready to embark on a wild and thrilling journey into the world of werewolves? Here. We'll explore the untamed nature, the raw power, and the captivating stories of these mythical creatures. So, get comfortable and let's unleash the wildness together. Werewolf Forest, Chapter 20. I paced in front of the bars, surly beginning to wear a rut in the frigid stone as my feet padded back and forth. Back and forth. We had been down there for hours without a single word from upstairs. Tix, will you sit down? You're making me dizzy. Davo's voice pierced the eerie quiet. Though it wasn't much more than a whisper, it seemed to be as loud as fireworks against the melodic beat of dripping water and my bare feet shuffling against the cold concrete ground. How could they do this to us? I exclaimed, no longer able to keep my outrage in silence. We trusted them and now they think we're traitors. My body was tense and my fury, my shoulders tight. My arms hugged to my sides, my hands clenching and unclenching into fists so tight to feel my ragged nails biting into the skin on my palm. Well, Davo began, but I wasn't done quite yet. How dare they? I mean, we haven't done anything wrong. I yelled, anger letting words flow out of my mouth like a long imprisoned lake breaking through the thick stone confinements of a dam. I worked my ass off training so I could fight for these people, and how do they repay me? By locking us in a freaking cage in their basement. Look, I know you're mad, but you need to calm down. No, I will not calm down. My voice pitched well above normal, echoing throughout the dungeon-like room. I half expected the small window to crack in its intensity. Why should I calm down? These idiots locked us in a cage. And what have we done to this Sasha girl, huh? Why does she hate us? Davo stood up and grabbed onto my shoulders, trying to hold me steady as if he was worried that any moment my fury would propel me through the ceiling. Listen, you need to, I haven't even been here that long and I met her. What? One spick. And then Connor. He's supposed to be the alpha. Some alpha he is. He just stood there and watched while we got dragged away. He let that manipulative, deceitful, spiteful little Maggie. The flow of words stopped abruptly as I looked up at Davo, catching his steely gaze with mine. He took my silence as an opportunity to speak. You need to calm down and think rationally for a second. His voice was slow and calm as a rippling creek, and equally as consoling, as he lowered his head to my level. Of course, they might see us as potential threats. We both fought on Danny's side in the last fight and, like Sasha said, we aren't even part of this pack. You agree with them? I asked, astonished, my nose crinkling in disgust. No, of course not. I know I didn't do it. And I know you would never betray your friends. I'm not saying what they did was right. I'm just saying I understand why they did it. I sighed and pinched the bridge of my nose as I fell backwards onto one of the shabby mattresses. My eyes traced non-existent patterns and images in the ceiling as he walked over and sat next to me. So what do we do now? I asked, not taking my eyes off the ceiling. Just wait around down here for them till I reached my hands up and bent my fingers in air quotes. Quarantine us. Well, what else can we do? Break out. I bit my bottom lip, chewing on it in thought. Not such a bad idea, no. I turned my head and looked into Davo's steady gray gaze. He looked down at me knowingly, his eyes seeming to read my soul, as if he had known what I was thinking. We aren't going to break out of here. I was just being sarcastic. Plus, do you know how guilty that would make us look? If we want them to believe us, that we're innocent, we have to do what they say. I sighed again. Fine. Just then, we heard the creak of the never-used door opening and the feet of multiple people making the rickety stairs moan under their weight. We both stood up and walked to the barred door to see our visitors. Enru came into view and he smiled a large, toothy grin when he saw me. Sasha walked close behind him. Her henchmen, Cameron and Gunnar, followed at her heels like two long since broken dogs obediently following their master. Andrew walked over to the door and twisted a key in the lock, swinging the barred gate open. "Come on, Nags." He motioned for me to come with him. I eagerly walked toward the door with Davo following close behind me. Not you," said Cameron, pointing to Davo, his low booming voice making everyone freeze in their path. "Just her. Andrew, what's going on?" I asked. "Why can't Davo come too?" "Your boy Toy vouched for you," Sasha chimed in, disgust clear in her voice and on her face. "Not him. Vouched Spidey, my fated mate. White splashed away on me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing." "Boy Toy, what is she talking about, Andrew?" "I vouched for you," he said, making sure to look me directly in the eye. "Which means you can come out of the cell as long as you're with me or Connor. And if you do actually turn out to be what you're suspected of, he will receive the same punishment you do," Sasha taunted, her hateful smile back on her face. I shot her a glare before turning back to Andrew. "Well, what about Davo?" Andrew's unsure gaze shifted to Davo for a fraction of a second before coming back to rest on my eyes once more. "I can't vouch for him," he said, loud enough for Davo to hear. "Why the hell not?" "I don't trust him," he stated with hate and resentment coating his words. "So you're just going to leave him down here? I don't have a choice," he whispered, trying to get me to lower my voice. "There's always a choice, Andrew." I hissed, venom seeping into my voice. "And I'm making mine." I stiffly walked back into the cell and stood beside Davo, crossing my arms defiantly over my chest. "I'm not going if he's not. I won't let him sit down here alone until you idiots realize your mistake." As the words left my mouth, hardened accusing, Andrew flinched, as if I had slapped him across the face. But I didn't care. Davo was my friend and I refused to abandon him down here. "Pix, what are you doing?" Davo whispered, his warm breath in my ear. I ignored him and continued to shift my glare from Sasha to Andrew and back. Andrew sighed. "I didn't want to have to do this. Cameron. Gunnar." I eyed the two large men skeptically as they pushed their way through the door and stood in front of me. Each grabbed onto one of my arms and began to drag me toward Andrew and the door. "Let go of me," I yelled as I dug me feet into the ground. Acting on instinct, I let my shield expand, enough to get them to back off but not enough to send them flying into the walls. I ran over beside Davo again, my shield lowering. But before I could make it more than 3 feet, Gunnar had picked me up and thrown me over his shoulder. "Put me down," I yelled into his back, pummeling him with my fists like a child having a tantrum. In this position I couldn't use my shield, because it would only result in me slamming into the ceiling. "Take her to my room, and make sure to lock the door, okay?" Cameron nodded to Andrew as he and Gunnar took me up the stairs. "Oh, watch it," I cried as my back slammed against the short door frame. I heard a mumbled sorry from Gunnar before he carried me up the steps into Andrew's room. He literally threw me into the room and locked the door. I pounded on the painted wood with my fists, yelling for them to let me out, but no one answered. I kicked at the bottom of the door, leaving a sizable dent in the wooden frame. I turned and looked around the room. It looked much like mine, except that it was about half the size of it and had 1 bed instead of 2. Andrew made a mistake leaving me up here, in his room, with his stuff, alone, while I held a grudge to him. A grave mistake. I started with the bed, tearing off the sheets and throwing them to the ground in a tangled heap. He had a duffel bag, like everyone else, filled with his clothes. That I dumped out all over the small space of floor. I debated whether or not to smash the single window that faced out toward the back of the house, but realized that would only be a penalty to Connor. And though I was slightly irritated with him as well, Looking back, he didn't have much of a choice in the council's decision. There wasn't much else to destroy, so I decided to take the entirety of his mattress and flip it off the metal frame. Then flipped the frame itself, the metal springs making a satisfying clattering noise as they slammed against the hardwood floor. I stepped back, satisfied with my work, and sat on the overturned mattress to await his arrival. Shortly after, I heard the door unlock and watched it slowly open. There stood a horrified-looking Andrew, with an open bag of chips in his hand. He looked to his bed, to his sheets, to his scattered clothes, and finally to me. "Oh, don't act like you didn't expect it," I said, glaring at him. He sighed and tossed the bag of chips to me. "I thought you might be hungry." He began to make his way toward me, having to step over shirts, pants, and sheets. I threw the chips back at him, hitting him straight in the face. "Damn it, Megs," he said, catching the chips as they fell off his face. "Why are you so pissed at me?" His glare now mirrored mine, accusing and resentful. "I got you out of that place and you're glaring at me like I sent you there. You left him down there alone, and yet some goon carried me up here." I took a deep breath, lowering my voice to a calmer tone. "Look, I appreciate you trying to help me, but the only reason you don't trust Davo is because you're jealous." He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "Don't try to deny it, we both know it's true. And then you had me dragged out of there against my will." My voice began to rise again with my outrage. "You had me carried out of there like I was your property or something. I had no say in the matter." "Mags, you don't own me. Nobody owns me. How dare you have me carried out of there like a freaking sack of potatoes? I'm sorry, okay?" He looked at me with pure desperation. "Jesus, Mags, I know I don't own you. I just couldn't bear to think of you down there locked up in a cage, especially after what you've been through. I couldn't just leave you down there." His eyes couldn't keep their hold on my face, so they drifted down at his feet. "But you could leave Davo. Did you forget that he's been through just as much as I have?" I crossed my arms in front of my chest and stared him down. He sighed and looked up at me again. "Look, I just can't vouch for him. I don't trust him, and you have to swear that you trust the person with your life to vouch for them. I don't necessarily think he betrayed us, but I can swear to that." I nodded, realizing that he was right, and I couldn't ask him to lie to his pack for me. I dropped back onto the overturned mattress. Well, I can't leave Davo down there either. He's my friend and he's been there for me. He's alone down there. Andrew. I can deal with being down there. I would abandon him, okay? He sucked his bottom lip into his mouth, chewing on it in thought. "What would you say to a compromise?" "What kind of compromise?" I asked skeptically. "How about you stay out of the cell during the day and you sleep down there during the night? Technically, I can't watch you while I'm sleeping anyway." "Fine." I stood up and shook his hand. "Deal." He looked down at our hands, still held in the contract, making shake. His thick eyebrows scrunched together, making his forehead screw into a mass of wrinkles under the dark curtain of hair that hung, perfectly straight, to just brush the edge of his eyebrow as it swept to the side. His lips turned down into an unsatisfied grimace and I dropped our hands. "Yeah, deal." He turned away from me and began to pick up some of his clothes. We both fell silent. The only sounds were the shuffling of his clothes as he picked them up from the floor, and the quiet hum of people outside and downstairs. "So," I said awkwardly, "why do you guys have a dungeon in your basement?" "Exactly." I grabbed the leg off the metal bed frame and flipped it back over, placing the mattress back on top. "A couple reasons. This kind of situation being one of them, though we've never really had this kind of situation before. And the other reasons, well, what we end up using it most for is rabid pups. Rabid. Like rabies. No, it's just a nickname that we have for people that have been turned and left on their own." He explained, not stopping his work of cleaning up the mess I had made. You see, if one of us gets turned and is left alone, with no one to explain what's going on, they tend to go a little crazy. They revert back to their primal wolf instincts and, in some cases, can forget that they were ever human to begin with. We haven't had too many of them, but Connor had the cages made just in case of that, or if we happen to capture one of Danny's higher-ranking pack members. We don't use it much, though. Oh, I guess that makes sense. So, on another note, why do you have your own room? Everyone else has at least one other roommate. Why don't you? He chuckled nervously, a slight blush forming on his cheeks. Well, I used to. This, he gestured around his room, used to be a storage closet. But we converted it into a room for me when my roommates complained. Complained about what? I prompted. Apparently. I talk in my sleep. He rubbed the back of his neck, obviously embarrassed by his Fae secret. I see. I bit the inside of my cheek, trying not to laugh. And what, exactly, do you talk about? I don't know, he said. They never told me. He put the last of the scattered clothes back into his duffel bag and zipped it up. What did ya say we go for a little run next? It's been a while. He smiled anxiously at me. Okay, sure. We made our way to the edge of the woods and he stretched his arm around my shoulders. Before this whole ordeal, this gesture would have been customary. But now, it meant more. I shrugged off his arm and ran ahead, him dejectedly trailing along behind me. Werewolf Forest, Chapter 21. The steps creaked as Andrew got under, and I descended them. I could hear the faint shuffling of the old, worn mattresses as Davo got up to see who was visiting him in this dismal place. His face lit up as he saw me, but then fell again in confusion. Gunnar unlocked the door and let me go inside, locking it again behind me. Enric came over to the bars. Are you sure about this, Maggie? He eyes kept flashing from me to Davo, who was standing close behind me. Yes, I'm sure. Don't worry. I'll be fine. All right. Just call up if you need anything, okay? Okay, night, Andrew. Night, Mags. He hesitated, not wanting to leave, but forced himself away from the bars and quickly walked up the rickety stairs before he could change his mind. Gunnar shook his head before following after him, closing the door with a click that reverberated about the concrete walls. Upix. I turned around to see Davo staring at me. One of his eyebrows was scrunched down over one eye while the other one was lifted up, making the forehead above it crinkle. His steel gray eyes flickered from me to the staircase and back again, a quizzical look flooding his them. What just happened? Why are you down here again? I walked over to the mattresses and sat on one, crossing my legs and leaning back on my hands. Andrew and I made a deal. What kind of deal? He was skeptical. That was easy to see. He stayed where he was showing no signs he was going to move any time soon, as he stared at me. Well, since he won't vouch for you too, we came to a compromise. I'll stay up there in the land of the living during the day and down here with you at night, but... What? Why would you want to be down here? You don't think I would leave you in a dungeon all alone, did you? What kind of friend do you think I am? I placed a hand to my heart, feigning hurt. Look, I'm fine. You don't have to be down here. He sat beside me on the mattress, making the dent I had made in the scratchy, stained material deeper. Well, you need company at some point, don't you? I'd come down to visit anyway, so what's the difference? I laid back and stretched my arms under my head, uncrossing my legs so I was more comfortable. Pix, just stay upstairs. I'll be fine. He lay down too, rolling on his side so he could face me. Plus, I don't think your boyfriend, he spat the word like a curse and grimaced at the sound of it, likes the idea of you spending the night down here anyway. I propped myself up on my elbow so I could look down at Davo. He's not my boyfriend. The words came out weaker than I had intended. Almost a whisper, so unlike the strong and sure words I had thought. Oh, really? The way he looks at you says otherwise. He seemed so sure in his assessment that I almost believed him. Come on. You can't be that blind to not see it. That guy's in love with you, and you know it. That day in the woods came flashing back to me at full force. I love you, Mags. I always have. I shook my head to be rid of the memory, but couldn't stop the feeling of pure ecstasy that had filled me when we had kissed that day. I shook my head again, knowing that remembering it was pointless and would only end up hurting me. He'll get over it. I looked down at the mattress, tracing the multicolored stains absent-mindedly. Get over it. It sounds like you talking about some kind of disease. Love is a disease. The words came out low and under my breath, but Davo heard them anyway. Maratspidey, my faded Nate. White splashed around me and my wind spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. He asked, wide-eyed. It never lasts and all it does is hurt you. It was a fact. I knew from experience. That's not true. Love can be great. It makes you happy. He sat up so he was looking my straight in the face. His eyes held such seriousness that, again, I almost believed him, but I knew the truth. It makes you weak, I hissed. All it ever causes is pain. Trust me, I know. Love can cause joy too. It does great things for people. Great things. Cynical sarcasm soaked my words as I laughed without humor. My mom loved my dad. A lot of good that did her. I was now standing, my fists clenched at my side as I faced Davo in anger. She loved him so much. She always forgave him, no matter what he did. And what did that get her? It got her killed, that's what. What do you mean? I laughed again in bitter cynicism. We went to a friend's party and he got drunk. As usual. The memory attacked my mind, coming back in vivid clarity. It was a wonderful party, Janice, said my mom as we walked out the door. Thank you for inviting us. Of course, said Mrs. Kent, clasping her perfectly manicured hands together. Thank you for bringing Maggie with you. It's nice to give Andrew someone to play with while the adults talk. It's just too bad you had to leave early. Her smile was wide over her bleached, white teeth and I rolled my eyes. Clara. My father's slurred voice sounded from down the walk as he headed to our car. Coming, dear. Well, well, it was nice to see you again, Janice. She placed a hand on my shoulder and we turned away. When we were far enough away from the house, she leaned down and whispered in my ear. If I had to spend one more hour with that woman, I was going to rip my hair out. We tried and failed to stifle our laughter as we walked to the car where my father was waiting. Was so funny, he asked as he leaned against the car. Nothing, dear, my mom replied as she went to open the driver's side door. W, how'd ya think you're doing? My father grabbed her wrist in his meaty hand, ripping it away from the door handle. David, my mom whispered, you're drunk. You can't drive. Don't tell me WHA, I can and can't do woman. He yelled. This is my car. I drive. No, David. I'm not letting you drive like this. It's dangerous. I saw my mom's eye, which as my father tightened his grip around her arm. Get out of my way. He hissed. No, he slapped her across her face and her head snapped to the side. I flinched at the sight but didn't say anything. I had learned not to interfere. Look, you little bitch, Dad. I interrupted him and put my hand on his arm. Come on. You're drunk. Just let Mom drive. He looked from me to my mother, whose cheek was now reddening, and back. Getting up in me, huh? I put a roof over your head and this is how you repay me. Fine. He leaned into my mother so I couldn't hear what he was saying. But, in his drunken state, he spoke louder than he had intended. Don't think this ges you out of anything. You'll pay later. He dropped her arm and I watched as color flowed back into her pale hand as she opened the door. As my father stumbled over to the passenger side, he laid his blood-shut eyes on me. What are you staring at? Get in the car, you wit. I quickly got into the car and we started driving. The car was never in silence. My father's constant complaining and cursing took care of that. Can't even drive my own car, he grumbled. I can drive to find Cece. He leaned over and grabbed the steering wheel from my mother, turning it sideways and making the car jerk to the side dangerously. David, stop, my mother yelled, while trying to shove his hands away. It's my car. It's my car and I want to drive. He moved over in the seat and slammed his foot on the accelerator. No, David, there's a red light. My heart began to race as we sped toward the intersection, the green light flashing to a deathly red. Dad, stop. I tried to crawl up to help my mom, but my seatbelt wouldn't unlatch. Shut up. We sped into the middle of the intersection, just as a large pickup was heading our way. The pickup slammed into the driver's side of the car, sending it tumbling towards the other side of the intersection. My mother's screams pierced the air as we rolled and tumbled across the road. I couldn't discern the screams of the shocked passer-bys from the horrible screech of metal against the pavement. It was just one loud roar in my ears as I was jerked against my seatbelt again and again. The only sound that I could really acknowledge was the one that wasn't there. My mother had stopped screaming. Our car rolled to a stop against a light post and I could hear sirens coming toward us. Something warm and wet was trickling down my face and neck as I fought the black dots that were beginning to cloud my vision. Mom, I mumbled. Mom, there was no answer. Can you hear me? Someone yelled from outside the car. Stay put. We'll get you out. I was barely conscious as I heard the whine of metal being ripped apart and someone pulling me out from under crushed metal and broken glass. I opened my eyes to people placing an oxygen mask over my face. Hey, Cece, wait. Called one man. Can you tell me your name? I groaned under the mask. Okay, Maggie. Can you tell me what day it is? Tuesday. Good. All right. We're going to get you to a hospital. You just need to stay with me and try to stay awake, okay? Where? Where's my mom? She's being looked at. You'll see her at the hospital. No, I insisted, sitting up on the gurney. I want to see her. He put his hands on my shoulders and tried to push me back down. You need to stay put, kid. You'll see her soon enough now. I pushed him out of the way and jumped off the gurney, ignoring the searing pain running through my body. I spotted my mom laying on a gurney next to an ambulance and ran toward her. Long. Her eyes were closed and her face was swollen, purple and red splotches painting her once tan skin. I put my hands on her chest and shook her. Wake up. Mom, please wake up. Her one eye fluttered open, the other too swollen, and looked at me. Maggie, she whispered. Yeah. Mom, it's me. Tears were folding down my face as I looked down at her bloody body. You're going to be okay. She smiled as much as she could with her injuries. I love you, sweetie. Her eye drifted closed again. Mom, I shook her again. Mom, wake up, Mom. Open your eyes. And EMT pressed her fingers to my mother's throat and yelled out to the others. She's crashing. More EMTs swarmed around her and one began to pull me away. Come on, honey, she said as she led me back to my gurney. No, Mom. I screamed as I struggled against her grip. They pushed me onto the gurney, but despite the pain, I resisted. I had to get to my mom. I had to help her. Mom let go of me. Mom, get me 10 cc of diazepam. Stat. I felt something stick into my neck and slowly my struggles weakened. Just relax. Darkness overtook me as the sedatives took effect, and only one thought remained on my mind. My mom was dead. I was alone. The lights flickered out, sending the cold basement into darkness. Without a word, I curled up onto a mattress and closed my eyes, wrapping my arms around my body for the warmth and insignificant comfort it gave. Though Davo was lying on a mattress a mere few inches from mine, I was all alone in this dark cell, and I knew I always would be. Werewolf Forest, Chapter 20. The fog was thick and heavy among the trees. It hung low around my knees, so that my bare feet were invisible under the misty white blanket. The sky was black and looming, starless, with only the glowing full moon to shed light in the darkness. I was alone in the haunting silence, not a cricket or owl to be heard. I didn't know where I was going, or why, but despite that my feet continued to move slowly, one after the other. I couldn't feel my feet touch the hidden ground, or the plants brush against my ankles as I should have. The smells of the forest seemed to have seeped into the wood of the trees themselves and hid there, beneath the bark. I heard nothing, not the sound of my breathing or the sound of my feet below the fog. Nothing. A deaf silence like cotton had been shoved in my ears. But no matter the feeling that my senses had deserted me, I didn't give a thought to it. My mind was blank, following the invisible path laid out for me. My movements were mechanical, my head straight, my arms swinging limp by my sides, my legs drifting easily through the fog. Maggie, the whisper just brushed the barrier of sound, quiet even in the silence. I stopped in my tracks and turned my head to the side, looking among the towering trees for the speaker. Seeing nothing, I continued on my way. Pixie. I heard the soft whisper, and again I looked for the speaker. Again, no one was to be seen, so my feet picked up their pace once more. The path opened up into a circular clearing, also covered by the fog. Who's there? No sound came out of my open mouth as I stood in the middle of the clearing, searching for any life among the trees. Mags, over here. A shadow moved through the trees into the clearing ahead of me. The fog swirled around its dark, upright figure, turning it smoky and white. It reached a hazy arm out toward me. Maggie. It's Aang. No, over here. Another shadow drifted its way into the clearing, but unlike the other one, kept its dark skin. Come with me, Pix. I'll protect you. Their voices melded together to form one haunting tune. My feet began to walk toward them, and my arm reached to touch their outstretched hands. But before I could reach them, a large cloud burst out of the trees and plowed into the dark shadow, sending it tumbling to the ground. The cloud fell on top of it, consuming the shadow's darkness in its white, smoky veil. Everything began to happen in a blur. Certain things would happen so fast that it was near impossible to tell the difference from one speeding body to another, and some moved so slow that they seemed to not be moving at all. More shadows and clouds filled the clearing, ramming into one another with force that sent them flying. The fog began to fade, drifting away into the trees, and revealed people and wolves under the cloudy haze. The blurs of skin and fur began to move at a lightning pace, leaving trails of foggy light and color behind them, like a picture taken of something moving. People and wolves zipped past me as I stood frozen in the center. I could hear muffled yelling and screams of pain, but they were faint and seemed miles away. The scene began to sharpen, and I began to make out faces. Connor, Andrew, Davo, Ellie, Cece, Bailey. They were all there, some fighting wolves and some fighting other humans. They were all bloody and showed the signs of battle, their clothes torn and covered in dirt and stained red with blood, some so tattered and matted with grime that they were falling off their bodies. They looked so different from the people I knew, so violent, so savage. An almost giddy look came to Cece's eyes as she broke the neck of her opponent, like she had enjoyed killing him, enjoyed the feeling of his fear as her arm wrapped around her neck, enjoyed it as his life lay in her hands for the taking, and enjoyed the feeling of his life slipping away and the light fading from his eyes. It was almost scary to see her like this. She had always been so happy and optimistic, but now she looked like a killer, a cold, ruthless killer. Just like the rest of the people that were filling the blood-soaked clearing with dead bodies. Teeth chomped and claws ripped in the carnage. Blood soaked the dead grass a shining crimson red as it flowed out of the combatants that had fallen at the hand of their enemies. I tried to run to help my friends, but my feet wouldn't move. I looked down to see large hand-like roots anchoring my feet to the ground. More roots shot up, wrapping themselves around my arms and body, holding me firmly in place. Help! Help! Again, my screams were silent as I struggled against the bonding roots, only making them tighten their grip. The bow began to blur again, making me focus on the one thing that stayed clear and sharp. A shadow glided out from the war of blurry bodies. It was unlike the others. It flowed with grace across the blood-stained field, its bottom billowing with what could only be a dress. The darkness began to fade from it, revealing the angelic face I had missed so much. Maddox Spidey, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my words spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. I whispered. Her hair was as long and as dark as ever. She had not aged in these past 4 years. Her face held the youth and happiness of a 20-year-old, though she was well beyond that. The long dress she was wearing was white and elegant pearls laced its collar that hung just off her shoulders. A small circlet of braided silver rested on her head and seemed to be woven into her shining chocolate hair. She was the image of an angel as she stood before me, smiling. Maddox Spidey, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my words spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. A lump came to my throat, and though I could not hear it, I knew I was sobbing. She smiled at me, brushing her hand along my face. A single tear rolled from her eye to her chin, dripping to the ground where it mixed with the blood of countless others. Her smile turned into a grimace as she put her hand to her stomach. A bright red began to seep through her dress and onto her fingers, staining the clean white fabric the color the ground now was. She fell to her knees, blood dripping her lips as her body heaved again and again. Nom nom. I screamed. I struggled against the roots, but they held me tight in their embrace. She fell to the ground, the whole front of her dress stained a deathly scarlet. She sighed her last breath, and collapsed completely, her muscles going limp, and her eyes going blank. Only then did the confining roots let me go. I ran to her, shaking her and patting her face, begging for her to say something. Anything. But it was too late. She was gone. Again. I looked up through my tears to see the battle had finished. Bodies were lying about the clearing, bloody and broken. Only one was left standing. A large dark brown wolf stood over 6 still bodies. He looked at me like a lion looking at a herd of gazelle, prey to be killed and eaten. His open maw dripped blood into the dead bodies beneath him, and his eyes were as black as death, an endless void of an evil nothingness. I looked down at the 6 faces of his victims only to have my stomach turn in horror. The first was almost unrecognizable. His face was torn to the bone, muscle and sinew ripped and slashed from his forehead to his chin. His body from his right shoulder to his hip had been torn off, leaving the broken ends of his ribs sticking out of the bloody muscle, that I knew Davo when I saw him. Maddox Spidey, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and the wind spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Silvery I left in his head was clouded and blank as it stared, unseeing, at the black night sky. The next corpse was almost in perfect condition, other than the fraying white bone sticking out of her left arm. Cece's dark brown hair had clumps of blood in it from a large gash in the top of her head, making it stick together under her face. Her eyes were closed, as if she were only asleep, but the chalky paleness of her skin and the missing rise and fall of her chest gave her true condition away, if her injuries already hadn't. Connor lay beside her, his stomach torn open by the creatures for razor-sharp claws and his guts spilling out into the red grass beside him. He had a look of absolute pain and fear on his face, his deep brown eyes open wide and his mouth contorted in a grimace, almost as if he had been alive when he was disemboweled. The body that lay beside him was almost too horrifying to look at. Bailey's eyes had been gouged out of her head, leaving nothing but bloody, gaping holes looking back at me. Her head had been bashed in, blood and brains slipping out of the cracks in her smashed skull and onto the ground or into her hair. Her jaw had been ripped open, leaving it hanging awkwardly to the side, the skin on her face ripped apart. Her arms were bent into impossible positions, as well as her legs, and there was a brutally torn gap in her chest, where her heart had been ripped out. I couldn't seem to pull my eyes away from the grotesque bodies, like my eyes had been taped open and someone was moving my head for me. My eyes moved to the next one and my heartbeat seemed to stop. His throat had been torn out, the esophagus lolling to the side against his neck, along with his right arm hanging by only a small piece of flesh from his shoulder. The calf of his left leg seemed to have been eaten away, leaving only bones showing from his knee to his ankle. But Andrew's face looked peaceful, as if he had died happy. I looked down at his left arm to see his fingers intertwined with the corpses that laid beside him. A knife was plunged through her stomach, but that was all. She had the least damage of the lot, but as I looked up at her face, my breath caught and my stomach turned with nausea. The green eye and short, spiky brown hair were all too familiar. As I gazed at my dead body, I heard the monster above me laugh. It was staring at my stomach and grin in a sick and sadistic grin, its teeth stained red with blood. I looked down to see a knife jutting out from just below my ribs. I grabbed onto it and tried to yank it out of me, but it was too late. The blood flowed from the wound and there was no stopping it. I began to grow weak, my vision blurring and my head spinning. Thump, 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 thump. As my heart slowed to a stop, the creature's evil laugh echoed through the bloody battle site. The corpses lay about, eyes open and staring, gaping at the starless sky above us. The creature's eyes glowed as it stared at its work. It had won. The sweet sensation of the kill still rang clear in its mind as it gazed at the bodies. Its pink tongue lapped at its jowls, savoring every last drop of precious red liquid. It bent down to feed on its kill, but first it looked to the girl, lying but 2 feet away, a knife in her hand and a hole in her gut. With its yellowed fangs still dripping with the blood of its victims, it sat in its haunches and raised its nose to the moon. The creature's howl reached far in the silent night, seeming to echo off the dark shadows of mountains in the distance. It turned back to its kill, sinking its teeth deep into the sweet flesh. Maggie, Maggie. My eyes shot open to see Andrew with his hands on my shoulders. Mags, are you okay? You were thrashing around and screaming something. I couldn't tell what. His eyes showed worry and concern. I noticed I was covered in a cold sweat, my breathing heavy and labored. That's Spidey, my fated mate. White splashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. What happened? I asked. You had a nightmare or something. Davo called us down here when you started screaming. I was screaming. Yeah, like someone was torturing you or something. Davo was standing some ways away from me, his arms held tight by Gunnar and Cameron. He didn't know how right he was. Werewolf Forest, Chapter 23. The morning air was crisp and cool. I could feel the chill of fall begin to creep up on the heat of summer. A few leaves had faded, streaks of red and gold adorning their veins. The silence around the house was heavy, almost suffocating. The hour was early and the whole pack was still asleep in the house. Andrew and I were the only ones up to witness the sunrise. I lay on my back in the grass and the fresh morning dew soaked my thin t-shirt. The chill from the water caused a shiver to pass through me. Here, Andrew said as he handed me his jacket. I'm fine. I put my hands behind my head and turned away from him. How long are you going to be like this? Mags, Andrew said with a sigh. I stayed silent, keeping my eyes glued to the murky morning sky. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I ever said it. He stood, his hands clenched into tight fists. I'm sorry that I actually feel that emotion once in a while. I thought that if I broke that stupid shell you keep around yourself all the time, that maybe, just maybe. His reddened eyes closed over unshed tears, and his cheeks were flushed the color of raw skin. He pinched the bridge of his nose and took deep breaths, calming himself. I lay still there, my mind a blank as to what to say to this. The only time I had ever seen him upset like this was when his parents left him. Once again, for a trip to Africa, Italy, or Switzerland. He always got his hopes up when they got back from a trip. This time will be different, he would say. They'll take me this time. I know it. They promised, but nothing ever changed. I would always comfort him by saying, I'll always be here for you. But in this case, that comfort was void. This time, I was the one hurting him. I was the one breaking my promise. The thought that I could cause him this kind of pain son of pains and a pang of it stabbing in my stomach. I wanted to jump up and hug him and tell him I was sorry, but I knew this was best for both of us. This pain would come at one point or another. Better to get it over with now and not prolong his suffering. He ran a shaky hand through his hair and looked me in the eye. You know what, Maddie? I can't do this anymore. I give up. His face was blank and emotionless except for the small glint of pain in his eyes. I take it all back. Everything I said. Everything I did, I take it back. Do whatever you goddamn please. I'm done. He stalked off to the house, slamming the door behind him. My breathing started to become rapid. The blood pulsing in my ears became all the louder. I could feel the watery warmth of tears burn my eyelids, but I held them back. I placed a shaky hand over my mouth as I silently sobbed. Just when I thought I would hyperventilate, I heard the door open and close again. I whipped around, thinking it was Andrew, but my heart sank when I saw a very tired-looking Cece walking toward me, a fluffy blue and white bathrobe covering her like a summer cloud. She saw me sitting on the ground, my knees pulled up to my chest and my face streaked with bruises from the weight of the few tears that had escaped my grasp. She sat beside me in silence for a few moments, allowing me to adjust to her presence. You want to talk about it? I stayed silent, staring at the tree line ahead of me. Okay then, I'll talk. Andrew and I have been friends for maybe 2 years now. He always had this fantasy that someday, when this whole thing was over, he would find you again. He said he would tell you everything, where he was, what happened to him, and most of all, how he felt. He said he would find you and everything would be okay. He'd take you away from your father and you could live out here, in the woods. The picture formed in my head and were coming in the middle of the night, slipping through my window like he always used to. I would hug him, rejoicing in the fact that he was there. After all that time, he would take me away from the cretin I call my father and tell me everything. Maybe in time I would have learned to love him. Maybe we could have been together. In a different time, a different world, a different reality, a small child danced in my vision. Beautiful facet green eyes adorned his plump angel-like face. Molasses brown hair laid short and choppy against his tan head. He danced about the field, jumping to catch a falling leaf as it slowly floated to the ground. A chime-like laugh reverberated through the trees as I watched him. His bright white teeth flashed in an angelic smile when his eyes connected with mine. Max by my faded mate. Lights flashed around me and my limbs spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. He called. The boy faded away and the present resumed again. Cece's voice sounded again from the depths of the ages, ringing in my ears like a curse. When he found you out here, he was. Well, he thought that this was his chance. She continued. That you would fall in love with him, like he always had been with you. But then, When you rejected him, almost stopped talking to him completely. It broke him, Maggie. His heart, his spirit, you name it, it was broken. He was so sure in this ideal future he had thought up that when it wasn't realized, it was like his entire idea of himself and everything was just shattered, shattered, broken. These words rang in my head. Shattered, broken. My outspidey, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wheels spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. The rain stung cold against my heated skin, falling like tiny piercing needles from the full moon above. It shone bright, the light seeming to reflect through the drills, making them look like little silver bullets before they splashed to the ground and into their true fragility. The rain cleaned the air of all old scents, only allowing for a single putrid odor to last the watery cleansing. The smell seeped into my nose, clinging there like a briar stuck on my shirt. They were close. My hair dripped the deceiving liquid onto my shoulders and ran down my sweat-covered back, mixing with the salt and dirt. The scent covered me like a layer of grime that couldn't even be washed off by the pounding shower that sounded about me. The rain picked up, coming down in sheets so thick I couldn't see the very trees in front of me. It pounded loud against the half-frozen ground like the drums of war sounding before a battle. The drums picked up, the battle coming closer and closer. The cries of the warriors sounded across the sky, accompanied by the strike of a spear crossing the heavens. The stars laid helpless in this great battle, almost completely hidden behind the gray looming blanket. The cries grew louder, shaking the very earth. A spear struck a tree, immediately setting it aflame before the drums pounded it out. A tree fell at the might of yet another spear crashing not 4 feet from me. I fell from the shock of it, but quickly pulled myself up, expecting no help from the battle-crazed warriors of the sky. I ran faster and faster, the thudding of my feet against the earth matching the beats of the drums. Faster. The smell was gaining. Faster. Another spear flew through the sky, missing a tree by not an inch. Faster. My heart was beating louder than the war cries, and yet my screams were drowned out. Faster. 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 Maggie. The sound of my name made me stop short. I turned to Cece running after me, her brown hair now black and shiny from the rain. Why are you running? Let's get inside. It's dangerous out here. She had to yell over the pounding of the rain, yet it sounded no more than a whisper of wind. My heart was racing as the putrid smell wafted into my nose. My nostrils flared and my eyes were wide and flickering, searching for any sign of movement in the bushes. They were here. I ran to her and grasped her by her shoulders. They're here. I yelled. Worry left her face and curiosity replaced it. Who's here? Danny. And he's not alone. She was silent for a few moments as her eyes grew wider. Are you sure? Yes. Another bolt of lightning struck, setting the sky into a white fire. Come on. Let's get out of here. She grabbed onto my arm and began to drag me back to the house. The rain let up slightly, but the war cries continued on. The battle was approaching. Cece stopped in her tracks and I stopped behind her, at first not seeing it. There in front of us was a dark figure, barely discernible from the trees. A bolt tore through the sky, illuminating the figure before us. He looked the same as he had last I had seen him, his eyes still as dark and lifeless. His lips raised in a smirk as he looked at our petrified faces. Danny, I whispered. Hello, Maggie. We've missed you, haven't we, boys? We turned to look behind us, and there, spotting from the shadows, were 2 faces that struck fear deep into me. Jason and Gage. My body felt weak and I wanted to get on my knees and beg forgiveness. Beg for them not to hurt me. Beg them for my life. Cece must have seen my no doubt ashen look. She squeezed my hand tightly, as if her grip were the only thing keeping me together. Well, 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 look what we have here, sneered Gage. His eyes glowed red like a rabid demon as he stalked back and forth behind us. Don't you know it's dangerous to be out in a storm like this? Jason feigned concern as he circled us. They stood in a triangle, closing in step by step, slowly, as if to prolong the panic of the capture. You didn't really think you could get away that easy, Maddie. Did you think we wouldn't know where you were? Honestly, sweetheart, it was naive to think we wouldn't find you. No one can help you. You're coming back with us, and that's where you'll stay. We'll even bring your little friend along. I'm sure the guys would appreciate another bitch around the camp. The more we feared, the more their smiles grew. Our fear was their drug, and they were searching for a fix. I felt a knife at my back, its sharp blade digging into my skin. A small trickle of blood streamed down my back, but I stayed silent, not letting them see my pain. You've been very bad, Maggie, whispered Jason. He put his hand on my hip, squeezing and rubbing it as he dragged the knife lightly along my spine. You're going to have to be punished. My eyes met Cece's and she nodded, squeezing my hand one more time. In a flash, I dropped her hand and threw at my shield. Jason immediately fell back, his knife flying into a nearby tree. They all looked surprised by this new ability, but they soon recovered, coming at me with everything they could. The shield held through their assault, but I could feel myself getting steadily weaker. I could hear Cece and Gage fighting in the distance, but my mind was focused on keeping the shield up. Every punch I threw, every blow I took, my shield grew weaker and weaker. A blazing pain shot through my spine, making my back arch. I turned to see Annie piercing my shield with a long, jagged knife. I fell to my knees and then to the ground, unable to move. Danny came and knelt in front of me. He held the knife in front of my face and I could see the light glinting off of the silver inlays. Not so powerful now, are you? He sneered as he plunged the knife into the ground before my face. He grabbed me by the arms and pulled me around so I was facing Gage and Jason. They were standing over a limp body, smirks on their faces and blood on their hands. Take this as a message to Connor. Gage kicked Cece's limp figure so her bloody face was gazing at me. We'll be back for you. He dropped my shoulders and walked away, melding back into the shadows along with Gage. Jason lingered, staring at me for a moment. He knelt and ran his fingers down the length of me and back up again. I'll see you soon, Maggie. Count on it. He disappeared into the shadows with the others and we were left, bloody and broken in the rain. I dragged myself over to where Cece laid, still and cold. I placed my hand on her face. Cece. No answer. Cece. Her eyes remained closed as I stared down at her. I could see a muddy footprint on her where one of them had stepped. I placed my ear to her mouth. No breathing. I got up on my knees and placed my head against her chest. No heartbeat. Without hesitation, I pressed my hands to her chest. 1, 2, and 2, 3. Back, Spidey, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. I breathed. I tilted her chin up and placed my mouth on hers, breathing air into her unmoving lungs. 1, 2, and 2, 3. Back, Spidey, my fated mate. Lights flashed around me and my wounds spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. I leaned my ear against her chest. Still no breathing. I breathed for her again, and again I listened, noting. I balled my hand up into a fist and slammed it onto her chest, making her body jump. Come on, Cece. I yelled. I counted again. Come on. I stared down at her limp body as the rain cleaned the blood off of her face. Her eyes were closed and her mouth was slightly ajar, as if she were only asleep. Laid my head on her and let the tears fall freely. It was only a whisper, but still I could hear it over the rain. Thud, thud. I placed my ear against her chest and the sound grew louder. Thud, thud. I tilted her chin up and began breathing air into her lungs, feeding her now beating heart with whatever life I could give it. Werewolf Forest, Chapter 24. Her face was pale with blood loss, her skin purple and swollen where their bare feet had brutally met her flesh. My eyes were focused on her chest, making sure it continued its steady path of up-down, up-down. It had been only hours since someone had hurried for help and brought us back to the infirmary. The doctor said it was close, but she would be all right. She had woken up only briefly, her groggy, oxygen-deprived brain sending out rambles of incoherent words and weakly struggling against the doctor's hold. She was sleeping now, and despite the new, forming bruises and bleeding knife tracks, she looked peaceful. The doctor came over to me once again begging to let her tend to my wounds, but I refused, a slight growl under my breath. The cut in my back was hardly life-threatening, but still she said it needed stikes. My shield had deflected most of the blow. The doctor said if it wasn't for that, I would be dead. And maybe I should have been. This is my fault. I had run out into the forest when I had smelled them coming. She called for me again and again, but I ignored her. It was all my fault. Maggie. I turned my head slowly to look at Connor, who stood at the door. Come on. You need to get cleaned up and get some rest. She'll be fine. I promise. No, I whispered. I'm not leaving. You need rest. Now come on. Let Amy stitch you up then go take a shower. Please just do it. All right. At Connor's signal the doctor came back over, carrying disinfectant and a needle and thread. I lay on my belly on the hospital bed next to Cece, still keeping a watchful eye on her, but my vision was blocked when the nurse pulled the curtain on my cot. I felt the needle tug at the gaping divide on my spine. The pain barely registered to me, though. My mind was far away from the infirmary, far away from the house, far on the other side of the forest. The doctor led me up the stairs to the small library. The unused door creaked as I opened it, but the noise didn't seem to bother Connor. He was hunched over at a desk, shuffling through the pelt of papers that clothed the desk. A mumbling of incoherent words came from him as he wrote something down and began to search through the stacks. The doctor cleared her throat, finally getting Connor's attention. Hello. He stood up and walked to us, just working out the supply list for this month. He gestured to the clutter of papers that almost hid the desk from sight. What did you want to talk to me about? I asked. I was wondering. Maggie. Would you be willing to plead your case to the council? They're all listening to Sasha. She can be very persuasive when she wants to be. And Gunnar has some pull with the others too, and that doesn't help. Where are you going with this, Connor? Well, I'm thinking that the council will continue to listen to Sasha and Gunnar as long as you and Davo remain an unknown threat. He went back to his desk, pushing the papers together in a messy pile. That's what they're afraid of, the fact that they don't know you. None of them, well besides Andrew and Di, have heard your story. All they know is that you were in Danny's pack for a time, and to them, that's suspicions. It took them almost a year to begin to trust Ellie. I highly doubt Sasha or Gunnar could be swayed, but Cameron is on the edge. He's been following Sasha, but he's not as resolved in it as Gunnar is. It's possible he could be convinced of your innocence. And then there's Ally. I have known her for some time, and she's a very reasonable person. And while Sasha did make some good arguments, I think she will change her mind once she has had a chance to ask you questions. I think you should meet with them. Tell them your story. Show them that you and Davo are innocent. All right. I'll do it. Well, that's good. We meet with them in half an hour. What? Half an hour? Why so soon? I scheduled the meeting last night, and I thought you would have gotten up here earlier. And of course I hadn't anticipated what happened earlier. But now there is no time to waste. Take a seat, Maggie. He gestured to a step stool that was set up against the bookshelves. I dragged it over to the desk and sat, leaning my elbows on my knees. So what about Davo? Will he be talking to them too? Well, I think I'm going to start with you, and then if they seem open to the idea, I'll bring Davo. Why were you at Danny's camp? Gunnar questioned me. Max Spidey, my faded Nate. Lights flashed around me and the room spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Room had been cleared out for the meeting. 6 chairs were facing me, the faces of the council staring me down. Connor and Andrew were in the middle. Connor's was the only face that was encouraging. Andrew wouldn't even look in my direction, his eyes always glued to the ceiling or to some paper in the table in front of him. Gunnar and Sasha sat to the left of Connor, both of their faces glowering at me with hate and disgust. To the right of Andrew sat Cameron and a girl, who I assumed was Ally. She was older than I was, maybe in her mid or late 20s. She was well-muscled and showed it in her tight gray tank top. A small golden pendant hung from her neck and she played with it often, twisting it and turning it in her fingers as she waited for me to answer the next question. Her hair was like fire, and a wildfire at that. It was long and unruly, curling into a puffy mess about her shoulders. A few curls swept over one questioning electric blue eye as she stared at me. She seemed curious, genuinely interested in what was going on. It seemed she was the only member of the council who hadn't made up their mind already. Cameron sat beside her, looking nervous and unsure, as if he were the one on trial, not me. I wasn't there out of choice. I couldn't help the bitterness that seeped into my voice as I spoke. They kidnapped me and forced me to stay there. But you were valuable to them, no. Eli's smooth French accent was a contradictory to her looks. It was soft and mild, and with her stark red hair and large bizarrely light blue eyes, it seemed out of place. Yes, I was. They sent me away to a separate camp for a time to train with another Amuvo Deuce. I may not have been as expendable as the other soldiers, but that was all I was to them. A soldier. A weapon. You say you would not betray the pack, but how can we trust you on that? I have friends here. You have treated me like family up until a few days ago. Why would I try to harm the one place I have left? I would never go back to Danny's pack. They're sick and twisted and I hate them. I have offered to fight for you, to risk my life to take out our biggest threat, and that offer still stands. I wouldn't betray this pack because it's the only thing I have left. My chest tightened. I took a deep breath to keep the tears from falling. Why would I help to destroy the only place left that I can call home? I waited for the next question, but one never came. Connor looked at me with sympathy and I could see a twinge of pain in Andrew's averted eyes, while Gunnar looked as if he didn't believe a word I said. Cece looked at me with pure, fire or white hatred, disgust clear on her face. Cameron looked guilty and averted his eyes about the room, never letting them set on me. I could see the slight shine of sweat on his face. Ally remained serious and intent, looking at me as if she were trying to figure out a puzzle. She was thinking, and thinking hard. I could only hope that she would come to the right conclusion. Connor stood and addressed the council. If that is all of the questions you have, we will go into deliberation. Maddie, please go with Ellie. I'm afraid you'll have to wait in the basement until we're finished. I stood and followed Ellie out of the room, leaving them to decide my fate. We walked in silence to the basement. When I came to the cell, I told Davo what happened so he could prepare if Connor decided to have him go before the council too. It was at least an hour before Ellie came back down. She started pacing furiously, mumbling under her breath. Ellie, what's wrong? I asked, leaning forward on the bars. That's Spidey, my faded mate. Lights flashed around me and my room spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Those idiots ruled against you, she said. They believed Sasha over you. How could they do that? It makes no sense for either of you to be the traitor. You just got here. Ellie, This council has always had some sort of brain aneurysm, but this just tops it. I mean, first they appoint a new guy over an experienced warrior that has fought for them time and time again, and then they're blind enough to. Ellie. She stopped pacing and ran her hand through her hair. Sorry, Maggie. I'm just really mad. It's all right. Just calm down. What exactly did they say? Davo leaned against the bars beside me. Well, Sasha and Gunnar obviously voted against you. Cameron was iffy for a while, but eventually went with them. Connor voted for you and Ally did too. But she trailed off, averting her eyes to her feet. But what? Ellie. Well. Henry forfeited his vote. Forfeited? What do you mean? For a time she wouldn't speak, but I let her find her voice. It means he gave up his vote. He didn't vote for them. Or for you. For a moment, my mind seemed to stop. I stared at her, not wanting to believe the harrowing message she just delivered. I don't understand. Why would he do that? I don't know. Maggie, if he had voted in our favor, made the vote a tie, what would have happened? They would have brought the next ranking member in to break the tie. Me and he knew that, yes. If Ellie had been brought in to vote, it went our way. And Andrew knew that. He wanted me down here, wanted me to suffer. He had betrayed me, just like everyone else. Thank you all for joining me in the wild world of Wild Werewolf. I hope you had an amazing time. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comments and likes, and come back for more wild adventures. See you next time.